realized this is the first in-person event I have moderated since COVID. I'm just realizing this, yes. I guess we're back. Let's see how it goes.
We'll let you know.
Thank you.
It might also be the last thing you
Might. Okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah, let's rock and roll.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Bridget Todd. Welcome to the space. I meant to tell you that this is all being live streamed, so hope you're all cool with that. Thank you so much for being here. This panel is on speech, censorship, and scale, content moderation in 2023. My name is Bridget Todd, and I'm the host of two podcasts on technology and how it connects us, Mozilla's IRL podcast and iHeartRadio's There Are No Girls on the Internet. As we're all spending more and more time online, the space between the online world and the IRL world is shrinking. It's more important than ever that we can all show up online safely. It's a safety issue and also an equity issue. And navigating how we get there is complex, from free speech concerns to privacy to expression. It is a balancing act. Recently, the First Amendment has been used to challenge and halt multiple online safety laws across the United States. Meanwhile, in the UK and Europe have passed new safety laws that attempt to regulate the difficult space of harmful but legal online speech. Add in the proliferation of new AI systems, and there's a whole new challenge. While these issues may start online, they have real-world consequences. Content moderation has played a central role in global conflicts in 2023, with propaganda and real-world violence and survival stories from Europe, the Middle East, and the Global South competing for the world's attention. Content moderation reflects the values and priorities of companies, countries, and societies. It's a balancing act, something all of our panelists know very well. With that, I will introduce our panelists. Noam, let's start with you.
Hello, my name is Noam Schwartz, CEO of ActiveFence. We're working in the space of obviously trust and safety.
Can you get your mic on, please?
Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, back in the game. Cool. So my name is Noam Schwartz. I'm CEO and co-founder of a company called ActiveFence, and we're working in the space of helping dating apps and gaming companies, social media companies, pretty much every company you can share on, tweet on, stream on, to protect their communities and from abusive content. Happy to be here.
Afternoon, everybody. Carl Szabo. I'm Vice President and General Counsel of NetChoice. We're a trade association that promotes free expression and free enterprise on the net. I also have a side gig where I'm a adjunct professor at George Mason's Antonin Scalia Law School. And Noam, I'm really glad you're here, because if you can get the 12-year-olds who keep absolutely dominating me in Halo to stop reminding me of it, that would be really helpful.
Can you do that, Noam?
Let's see. Me and Mike can work together on that.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Ruan. I don't have a joke that good. Don't even know how to play Halo. But I am the director of the Free Expression Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're a civil society organization that protects civil rights and civil liberties online. Look forward to the discussion.
And hi, everyone. I'm Mike. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Modulate, which is a company that works with game studios and other social platforms to help them up-level their safety game. Most recently, we partnered with Call of Duty to bring our AI-powered voice moderation to their platform. And I'll just say on the Halo front that I'm probably worse than you at Halo, even if you've never played before. So,
Well, Mike, let's start with you. And I have a question for you and then for all the panelists. I want to start by kind of looking back at where we've been. Given everything that has happened in the last 12 months, when it comes to the state of content moderation, how do you feel? Are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic? Where are you at?
I'm multifaceted. I think there's a lot to be hopeful and optimistic about. We pay a lot of close attention to what's happening in both sort of the social atmosphere as well as the regulatory space. And I think over the last year, there's been a lot of increased discussion across sort of all dimensions around the importance of effective content moderation, effective trust and safety, as well as the risks of those things. It's been really gratifying to see a lot more major entities really participating in a meaningful conversation, having the opportunity ourselves to speak with regulators, with individual members of industry, with end users, and really understand their perspectives around what it is that they're looking for from a platform. So I think compared to, beginning of this year or a couple of years ago, there's definitely a lot more momentum for change. I think there's also still some challenges, still some things that need to be worked out in terms of defining what exactly it is that we're shooting for as we try to strike the balance between things like safety and privacy, which are not antagonists to each other, but do pull a little bit and have a healthy tension, and we need to make sure that we're able to navigate that stuff well. So I think we're moving in the direction of being able to have those conversations well, but those are conversations that have yet to be fully resolved.
The rest of the panel, I would love to hear your thoughts. When you think about content moderation, given everything that's happened in the last 12 months, how are you feeling about it?
I mean, one of the challenges with content moderation, I explain this to a lot of people, is it's time dependent, location dependent, attitude dependent. The simple example I often go with is if we were to have a policy of no nudity. Okay, that seems reasonable, right? No nudity. Well, the Statue of David then becomes illegal. Or you have the famous image of the Vietnamese girl running from napalm from Time magazine. So a lot of it is context dependent. I can tell you the four-letter profanity, starting with an F, can be very positive. It can be very negative. It can be somewhere in the middle. Once again, time dependent. So it's all, for lack of a phrase, relative, and that makes it really hard on the content moderation side because we can't come up with a single rule. It's not like people often say, well, we have rules for speeding, right? 55 miles per hour. You can't go faster than 55 miles per hour. Why can't you say, well, you can't say this? Because it depends. That's the thing about free speech, and that's the challenge. But I am optimistic. I am really excited. One of my colleagues, Zach, over at NetChoice says, too often we end up just jumping straight from this is amazing, this is awesome, to this is the worst thing ever. It's something that we're all kind of suffering with. I think AI is a good example of that right now. But we can be excited, and the folks on this panel are part of that team who are looking at the situation and integrating technology, new ideas, new solutions to help make sure that the content moderation is appropriate for context, for time, and similar.
Oh, please.
Gonna be quick, but like something that I must say. I think I have some perspective about the evolution of trust and safety and content moderation in the last few years. I was a content moderator myself in 2008. And today, trust and safety is mainstream. Trust and safety, content moderation, what many of us are doing on our day-to-day jobs, people are talking about it all the time. It's in the media, it's in podcasts. People know what that means, and people also understand and respect how complicated it is, and also how frustrating it can be. And actually, I'm so optimistic because of that, because people understand that it's a challenge, and they don't expect that this thing would be solved immediately. And this gives a lot of, let's say, a lot of room for us to actually contribute and change things for the better. Because the easiest thing for haters is to say, well, you can solve that right now, so it's probably not worth solving, or it's impossible to solve. But we all know that things take time, and it is possible to solve it. And this is why I'm optimistic. This is why I'm optimistic, because I'm seeing people are actually acknowledging that.
Yeah.
I just want to say, I share a lot of the optimism that I've heard. To make a couple points about equity. Carl pointed out that content moderation is context specific. One of the most important contexts is language, and we do a really, really, really kind of good job in English, but other languages less so. We also do a really good job moderating content when it is, spoken by the majority, spoken by people that are part of the mainstream, and less of a good job when we're talking about people who have marginalized identities. But I'm optimistic because we get that. We understand that we're talking about it, we're thinking about it, we're talking to companies about it, we're talking to each other about it, we're researching it. And the more that we do that, the more we can plug into this iterative process and improve things for everybody across the board.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. It's like you're reading my mind, Kate. One of the things that comes up as a frustration, I think, is that nuance and that context. I have certainly had times where I know a content moderation team is not necessarily speaking my language online as a Black woman, and so they'll say, "Oh, this is not appropriate," but they might not understand the in-group conversation that's being had. And so, I guess my question for all of you all is, how can we get to a place where there is more equity in terms of how this content is being moderated, so people aren't feeling like their speech or their expression is being policed by somebody who doesn't even speak the same language as they do? Obviously, I mean that in the sense of language, like they're speaking a different language literally, but also figuratively, where we might be speaking a different language culturally that you might not understand.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a tough nut to crack, I'll say. And one of the things I know at NetChoice, we have several active lawsuits protecting the right of these businesses to engage in content moderation how they want. We've got them against red states, we've got them against blue states. Some want us to allow everything that's offensive on the planet. Some of us want us to remove everything that's offensive on the planet. What I take heart in is that, first of all, our Constitution protects the rights of anyone to say what they want to say on their private spaces, and then kick people out on their private spaces as well. But similarly, I think it is with businesses. I believe in businesses will figure it out, and they have. They start hiring people from all across the country, from all across different cultures, because they want to get it right. And they don't, I'm not going to say that they're the most philanthropic groups, but they do that because it's in their own self-interests. They want to make sure that when we go to their platform, or when they use their services, when I lose at Halo, that I don't hate the experience. I want to keep doing it. And you can only do that if you get it right. And if the content moderation is bad, and trust me, it's bad. I hear it all the time from people on the left and the right. They're like, I got thrown in Facebook jail. I'm just picking on Facebook. Because of something I said. I'm like, well, that's their right. But they're going to try to get it correct. And they do that by hiring people from all across the globe, from all across different cultures. And they are trying their best. And when they get it wrong, we need to let them know so that they can have even more incentive to get it right next time.
I'm going to be mildly pedantic here and say it's not so much correct because, as we've called out, there's not really one correct for this, but it's consistent and transparent. And Bridget, you were talking about how do we do this well, but then you were also hinting at how do we build trust with end users that we're doing it well. I think a really key part of that is being really transparent with end users around what kind of space is this supposed to be. Maybe you have a belief that you should be allowed to have all these really detailed, sort of potentially toxic conversations, and the platform just doesn't care to be the specific venue for you to have that conversation. That's okay. It's fine for different platforms and different people to have different perspectives on it. But without that transparency, you end up having all these clashes where people come in expecting one thing or demanding one thing, treating others under those assumptions, and that's where you really run into the issues. Really briefly on the technically sort of how do we solve this as well, I'll say the way we think about it at Modulate is trying to move away from the sort of terminology of content moderation and think of it more as harm moderation. What we're looking for is not, did you say the F word, to take that example from earlier. We're looking at, are there indications in this conversation that someone is being harmed? And especially in voice, you can look at that from a lot of angles. You can see what people are saying. You can see the emotion of how they're saying it or how other people are responding. You can even look at behavioral cues. So a new person joins the conversation, says one sentence, and everyone suddenly goes quiet for 30 seconds. You don't need to know what the person said to know something bad just happened.
The record scratch.
Right? So being able to put all those puzzle pieces together gives us much more ability to say, hey, let's actually, protect people who are having bad experiences on the platform rather than mandating exactly how you need to interact with each other or what words you're allowed to use.
Is this something that you feel is possible to do at scale? Like you're saying all the things that I love to hear, but I'm sure there are folks in high-level decision-making positions who are like, but we could never have that be something that works for every user. Do you think that's possible?
There's two big caveats. One is that we have a bit of an advantage with voice because it's so multidimensional. You get the emotion, you get things like pauses, you get whether people are interrupting or speaking over each other. Something like text or images, you're going to have different kinds of sort of metadata to be looking at that may be more difficult to get that kind of complete picture of the story of what's happening. So we can do this really robustly in voice. It is a fundamentally different story from other media types. The other challenge is that there are some types of harms that don't harm a specific person there in the conversation. So the process I described is great for detecting things like hate speech. But if you're trying to detect, hey, is there a group of white supremacists plotting something in the real world? No one there in the conversation is feeling or experiencing or exhibiting signs of being harmed by the conversation itself. So for certain kinds of harms like that, you do need to sort of fall back to content a little bit, and you can still do it in a very rich context-aware way, but that's where those kinds of approaches get harder. But with those two caveats, yes, you can do this robustly at scale, and it's something that we and some other companies are already doing robustly at scale.
Go ahead.
So there's a few ways to also do it at scale, and it comes from a few kind of like more original ways to do it. So first one is to actually do the research and understand beyond your immediate target audience. And everybody's biased. Like you can't go around it. This is part of life. This is part of being human. But how do you over-engineer so your team won't be biased, that your company won't be biased, your policy won't be biased, and actually spending the time, the resources to figure out what you're not seeing and implementing that and almost forcefully bringing that into the discussion, into the policy making, which is a very hard process, as you know, is a major thing of that. Another thing that is not really discussed a lot, and I think it's pretty innovative, and some companies, especially in the gaming space, are doing that today, is understanding what's causing the positive engagement, the actual good things. Because it's very easy to recognize, not easy, I'm sorry, but we know how to do it, how to recognize the bad experiences. Like Mike said, that everybody's now like shutting up for 30 seconds. Oh my God, what did they say? But what is the kind of speech, what is the kind of experience that makes everybody get more points and buy more virtual goods or whatever you'll define as a positive engagement. And actually learning from that, training algorithms based on that is also something that can really help broaden the discussion, in my opinion.
That's really interesting.
One of the other, first of all, I love the idea for Modern Warfare 2. If people give you thumbs up, you should get like an auto up rank. I think there you go, reinforce the good news. But we also need to look at the way that it's done, because content moderation is not universal in the way that it's done. Most of us always think of kind of this top-down command and control, because that's what several of the major platforms do. They set their rules at the top, and they're the ones who activate whether content is removed or kept. There are other platforms, I like to pick on Reddit for an example of this. This is user moderation. So if you go into any subreddit, the removal, the content moderation, whether you're following the rules, they are done by user moderators. So that's another way that we can do stuff at scale, is leveraging and harnessing the actual people on the platform. Now also the big guys do it as well. If you see bad stuff, you can flag it, you can notify it for the content moderators, you can up-like stuff that you use. And let's also remember, that is a form of the content moderation that is being done. And then to take it back to where Steven started this whole day with AI, of course, being the alpha and omega of all conversations in DC these days, that can also be a really useful tool, because we've been using it for 20 years in content moderation decisions when it comes to spam, right? Spam emails are essentially AI content moderation. Does this email make it to your inbox, yes or no? And you can't get around it just by changing a word here or there, because if so, spam blockers wouldn't work. So we do that. We do that with SEO optimization. So I think that's where also artificial intelligence, for whatever you want to define that as today, can actually be another tool to do this at scale. And it learns by how we engage with it. Because if you get that 30-second pause, it'll figure out, wait a minute, something's up, dog, and then they'll address it.
That's a great pivot. We talked a bit about this on the prep call, AI. How do you see AI is impacting these conversations around content moderation? This is an open question for anybody.
Changes everything. Really, like it makes it from like let's say it makes it more accessible. Like right now, there's like a lot of like great APIs that can do generic content moderation. So people that didn't do anything are doing something, which is positive, right? However, it's also crystallized how important it is to be expert in one topic that you really want to cover. If you're taking seriously CSAM or human trafficking or topics that are close to our heart right now, you can't really wing it with AI, like just random AI like out of the box. So this is why it's also dangerous to rely just on things that we're seeing right now. Another angle is the content that is being created. The conversation around AI is very convoluted, and it's very important that we won't mix the discussions of people from general intelligence and like the Matrix is here, Terminator is here, than to the risk of disinformation, hate speech. What's actually is happening right now, as we all saw, like in all kinds of demos that were circulating in the last few weeks and months, that is actually harmful. And when we're focusing on that, let's solve this problem one at a time and actually try to work with the foundation models and help them solve that problem that they're offering the public. I think we can actually make real progress in helping AI be safe.
So, go ahead.
Me? Okay. I think, first things first, they're going to use it. Companies are going to use it. And so, what are, and like CDT has done a lot of research into this, and the questions that we ask are, what do they use it for? What are its capabilities? What are its limitations? How do we mitigate those? I think all of those questions need to be asked before implementing these types of tools. And I think that the limitations are probably the thing that we sort of allied the most in these conversations, because it's like, this is like magic. This is so cool. It can automatically identify all of these things. Except, when you're talking about things like hate speech or terrorist content or even child sexual abuse, to the extent that it's not child sexual abuse material, which is like a known image in the world. We are talking about speech that is difficult to define. The AI needs a definition. And it needs a concrete definition in order to be able to identify what is or isn't in scope of a particular rule. And that definition, whatever it is going to be both over and under inclusive. It's going to include things that are not that should not be included in the definition of hate speech. It's going to exclude things that probably should be included, either because people get creative because they substitute words, or it just does not identify a particular new context in which hate speech is occurring, for example. The other piece that we should put on this is like, what is the AI being used for? Is it being used only to identify potentially rule-violating content, or is it also being used to take action against that content? Because one is different than the other, and one is potentially more concerning than the other. When you have an entirely automated moderation process, you increase your equity concerns even further, right? So to the extent we have over and under inclusiveness, those are both going to create and exacerbate equity concerns. When you then move to automating the entire moderation process, such that the AI makes a decision, and these are sophisticated enough that they don't just have to decide leave it up or take it down. They can decide other things too. They can decide down rank, they can decide promote. They can make those decisions. And so those are all things that we need to consider. Companies are going to use this. What are the things that we can do to support their efforts? Like that this is going to happen. So how do we support civil liberties? How do we support equity as we know companies are going to adopt these tools? I think to the extent that they're taking stuff out of the box, to the extent that we can help them customize off-the-shelf AI for their particular services, that can be really useful. And the other thing that we're going to keep needing is research, independent research that can be done that can be done in conjunction with the platforms, but not by the platforms themselves. Those are going to be really important things that happen as we continue to increase our reliance on AI in content moderation.
So I'd love to add on to that last piece in particular. I mean, we've talked about AI for generating content. We've talked about AI for detecting content. You were just talking about AI for then making those decisions and the risks that come with that. I also want to kind of flip that around on the last piece where when you're taking action on a piece of bad content today, most platforms will actually say basically nothing about why they're taking that action. They'll just take the action, or it'll be a very minimal piece of content. The platforms that have found ways, usually at high manual costs, to give real color back to the end user on here's what you did wrong, here's why this wasn't okay, have actually seen really massively positive impacts in that changing the behavior of their end users. But that's really difficult to do at scale. That's a really interesting application of AI technology, making those actions more positive and helping us move away from that mindset of everything's a ban or a mute or something like that, and into, okay, this conversation went badly, let's coach, let's support, let's help people find their way out of this bad equilibrium into better ways to interface with each other. I think study after study, continually shows of all of the sort of toxic content, at least in live conversations, whether it's in gaming or social chat, it's something like 5% of the people creating that bad content are actually trying to create bad content. 95% of the users are trying their best, and maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they snapped because they lost at Halo, maybe whatever it is, but they're not fundamentally trying to ruin other people's experience. They're just struggling, and that toxicity is emerging from it. And so the more that we can support and guide them, and I think AI is a tool that can help us do that, though like every tool, it needs to be used carefully and in a way where it's well understood.
I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to content moderation, what's the old adage, right? You can please all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you never please all the people all the time. And unfortunately, that's the truth with content moderation. I'm constantly hearing from people all across the political spectrum about they took action against me because they hate me or they hate my policies. I'm like, that may be true, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to do their best job. And they're going to your point, they're going to get it right a lot of the time. They're going to get it wrong a couple, not so much, but you're going to hear a lot about the times you get it wrong. And I think that's an important one. Just to close the loop on AI real quickly, at NetChoice, I can tell you our policy is it is a tool. AI is a tool. As I mentioned, we've been using it for 20 years. Bad guys are going to use it. Good guys are going to use it. You can't outlaw it. I know we're here in DC where everyone rushes to regulate and control everything. Instead, what we are advocating for is you identify the gaps in the law where they need to be filled in. The one that comes to mind, because it was mentioned a moment ago, is child sexual abuse material. Today, CSAM, it requires an actual photo. So what we're seeing is bad actors are now using pictures of children on AI-generated bodies. And so that's an example of where you can do some gap filling, where bad actors are using the letter of the law to escape the purpose of the law. And so that's kind of what I think is kind of the overarching approach when it comes to content moderation or AI is let's figure out what we're trying to stop and then move backwards, because we just had some really good points about do we want to encourage the good things or stop the bad things, and is there a way of doing both simultaneously?
If I can add one more thought on here, when we're talking about AI, I think it's worth reflecting on what's the alternative in terms of manual action or manual intervention. One obvious difference between those approaches is scale, but I think there's other subtler ones. Human moderators, no matter how hard you try to train them on consistent policies and set what you're doing, they are not going to behave in consistent ways because they're bringing in their own priors, their own understanding of the things. In a certain sense, that can be good. It means, hey, you're not going to have everything about your platform be definitively skewed in one way. It's harder to have that really explicit sort of failure of equity when you have a spread of human moderators. The downside is it's a lot less transparent because the actual enforcement policies are much harder to put into explicit words. And I'm not going to advocate one way or another, but I think it's an interesting question to reflect, Would you rather have a platform that is trying really hard to be equitable using human moderators, but every once in a while some human moderator is just going to be confused or is going to be a bad hire and is going to be, pursuing some political agenda? There's this inherent ambiguity, but it's generally all directed towards trying to be as inclusive and respectful as possible. Or have a platform that just said flat out, here's the deal, we're banning the N-word. Yeah, we know that takes away a lot of authentic experiences of some people, but that's what we're going to do, and now and now you can make an informed choice of whether you want to participate in that platform. That doesn't work at a societal level. If that's the truth of every platform, then we have a real problem. But if individual platforms land in different positions there, I do kind of wonder if it's worth thinking about that transparency being another way to achieve the equity that we're really looking for.
By the way, on that point, and not necessarily related to AI, but it's so important. What I'm seeing, and we're working with a lot of companies like social media, gaming, dating. One big problem, which is a real obstacle to let's say online safety, but also in real life safety, is basically not making a decision about a specific thing, and kind of like not wanting to get someone angry, and okay, we will see this one out. We'll see if the community will figure it out somehow, and usually they won't figure it out somehow, and then bad things happen, and then there's a news article, and then off to the next crisis. And this thing, basically, someone needs to be brave, make a decision. This is what we think. This is what's going to happen. If you don't like it, there's another platform, or there's another solution, there's another game. Because this will be like a never-ending of race to the bottom, like who makes the less decisions, and where we have less safety, and where more people getting hurt, which is, I think, is a very, very important issue.
And I think it goes back to the point that Mike made about trust. It's hard to feel like you have the trust of the people making these decisions if decisions aren't being made. Or, in my opinion, it's worse if somebody makes a decision and then 6 months later they're like, well, the conversation has changed, so we're taking that decision back. And it makes it feel like, as a user, you have no control, let alone transparency, into how decisions get made. And so I think it really goes back to that point about how do you get people to trust that you're actually doing things in a way that they can understand and have some visibility into.
If anybody wants to try this at home, there's a video game. You can play it on your phone. Speaking of video games here, it's called Moderator Mayhem. It was created by a trade association called Engine. And literally, you take the place of a moderator, and you got your rule, and the things that get flagged just keep piling up, and they keep coming in. You got to make decisions, and then at the end of the day, they'll rate you, and you're making it based on the rule. And it's really stressful. And spoiler alert, you can't win. It's a
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, it's a Kobayashi Maru of a video game. But it's quite illustrative, the real challenges, because you can have these clear-cut rules, and they're really hard to apply, especially at scale. But I am optimistic. All the discussion we've had so far have been, how do we as users, how do we as businesses, how do we as third parties, how do we as developers create the tools to address this problem? One thing we have not looked to, and this is very encouraging to me, is we've not looked to the government to tell us what is or is not allowed on our platforms. Because keep in mind, for United States, First Amendment, everybody who's not from here, you can roll your eyes now. But that is wonderful to me, because I can quit a business that is not doing what I want it to do. We can hold them accountable. We cannot hold governments nearly as accountable. And that's the thing that I find very encouraging. And I've got a bunch of smart people back in my office, locked in a legal department dungeon, working on lawsuits and briefs that we're filing to uphold the values, to make sure the government's not the one setting the rules as to what we can and cannot say, but instead we, the people, the users, the businesses, get to make those decisions. So that's been really encouraging for me on this panel.
Just to, harp on top of that on my favorite peg of transparency again, like where should government be involved? I would argue that that's where that regulation can be really powerful, where it pushes for more transparency so people can make that informed choice to vote with their feet. I think if we don't have that, then to Bridget's point, you just have people having various different experiences, and it's really hard to say, do I actually respect the way this platform is approaching things? But if we have that regulated transparency and people can actually make really meaningful, informed choices, then I agree that allows us to hold that private industry accountable in a much more rich way.
Yeah, Noam and Kate, I'm curious, what role do you think government should have in all of this?
That's a big one. And I think we're discussing this thing for a very long time. And kind of like connecting it to what I said before, where platforms are unable to make a decision. So sometimes kind of like setting ground rules should be made. And we're seeing this with, let's say, with CSAM. It's like if you have like a platform, and I think yesterday I saw a post from the E-Safety Commission about one of the platforms basically getting shut down because they were not able to deal with CSAM. And I think this is a good thing. Eventually, if a platform cannot comply with what society thinks is a basic rule, it should actually put their foot down. And eventually, we need to minimize where government actually intervene. But sometimes there are places where the industry can't make a decision, and eventually the people need to make a decision for their own.
That platform was Omegle,
Mm-hmm.
by the way.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to pronounce it.
I might have gotten it wrong.
I mean, one of the challenges there, though, and so child sexual abuse material, I'm not going to fully put on my lawyer hat, isn't considered fully protected by the First Amendment. It's this other space. But simultaneously, we can't lay all the blame at the platforms. Because, what was it, the AG, the Attorneys General, the lead chief enforcer of the state of Utah said, well, we can only take action on 30% of the instances of CSAM that get reported to us. And to me, as a parent, I'm like, are you kidding me? 7 out of every 10 instances of child sexual abuse material goes in the shredder in the state of Utah. And you're blaming the platforms for your inability to enforce the laws. So simultaneously, yes, platforms need to do reporting. They do a ton of reporting. We've done reports on that. I see Maureen Flatley from Stop Child Predators in the back as well. Like, they do great work on this. But that needs to go hand in hand with putting the criminals in prison. And like, you can't say platforms got to do it all, because guess what? We can put you in Facebook jail. We can't put you in real jail. And it's kind of more the latter that matters. So yeah, when it comes to stuff like CSAM, absolutely throw the book at them. Platforms can and always are doing more. But simultaneously, we need hand in glove with law enforcement to actually kick in doors and put those people in prison. Sorry, that's my rant. I apologize.
It's a good rant, I'm not going to lie. Especially, Ron Wyden has a bill for that.
Yes, I know. We very much like it, so.
Yeah, I mean, CSAM aside, I would say, I'm a U.S. First Amendment lawyer. I apologize to everybody for that.
Yeah.
Apologetic lawyers on this panel.
Carl and I are alone. So, I have, and I also worked for the ACLU, so I have a very deep skepticism of government involvement or government decision-making related to what people can or cannot say anywhere, the internet, my house, out on the street. I have a deep skepticism of that. I also have skepticism of policies that would allow the government to put pressure on platforms to make them say what they want to say or ban what they want to ban, and that can, some transparency legislation can actually be a Trojan horse for that sort of thing. All of that said, that's my First Amendment spiel. I have deep skepticism of government involvement in content. That being said, DSA exists. The DSA exists, and it is going to have profound effects on content online. And I think those of us in the United States with an eye on it, like, a lot of the concerns, a lot of the things that like I have spent my career fighting against here, like no notice in action, no auditing of like speech related decisions. How can you possibly measure what a systemic risk is when the systemic risk is gender-based violence in the world? I don't know how you do any of that. And so I've spent a lot of time in the US being like, you cannot do that. You can't, like, government cannot do this under the First Amendment. And that's probably true here, but it's happening there. It's happening in the EU, and we need to pay attention to what is going on there, because it is going to happen here too, because we've been talking a lot about scale. And so even though a lot of these things only apply in the EU, some of the practices that especially the global platforms come up with that they're going to implement under the DSA are going to happen here too. And so we need to be aware of that. Like, so what I guess what I'm saying is, to some extent, what I think the government involvement in content moderation should or shouldn't be doesn't matter, even though I wish it did. It's already happening. We are already seeing governments involving themselves in content moderation. In the EU, we got some good safeguards, but there are also some significant concerns. The biggest concern to me is now we're seeing it everywhere else. You know, we see it in India. We see all of these all of these proposals from governments that you know trend further and further authoritarian, that are going to fracture the internet. They're going to fracture content moderation. They're going to fracture the freedom of expression online. And so, like, how do we handle that? How do we wrap our brains around that? And how do we I don't. This is like the worst answer to this question ever. Because it's like, it is such a big issue that is you know kind of vectoring across different places around the world, and we in the U.S. we're holding back. We can continue to hold our principles, and goodness gracious knows I will, but I also have my eye elsewhere and on how that's going to impact us, regardless of what we can or can't do here.
And I mean, I already partially answered this question with the transparency piece, but to what you're saying here, like, I think the other thing is, who can solve regulatory fracture? Probably no one. But if anyone, it's going to be government entities. Like, those are the entities that can play in that space and actually try and have a really meaningful impact on resolving some of that regulatory fracture and giving more clarity to the industry, hopefully moving in a direction that's really industry informed and really civil rights informed, and making sure that we're balancing all those considerations in an effective way. So I don't exactly know what that looks like, but given that we have the DSA, the UK Online Safety Act, the e-Safety Commission out in Australia, we have the Singapore Online Safety Bill, we have other bills, as you mentioned, in India and other places, something needs to bring all those things together into a consistent story for industry and platforms of what are we actually supposed to do? How do we actually straddle all of those different lines? And I would love to see, you know, increased engagement from all of those government players, as well as from the US, on finding some way to bridge that together into something more consistent and less fractured.
By the way, there's another thing to kind of a response to what folks said here. There's a governance asymmetry that eventually platforms are so much more powerful than any government. Because the government can, you know, decide whatever they want, but eventually, you know, the head of policy in a given platform, no matter how small it is, you know, their decision goes in Singapore, their decision goes in India, their decision goes in the United States. So sometimes the responsibility is actually on them, maybe not from a legal perspective, but from a moral perspective. But regardless of that, we're actually seeing, and also about the DSA and other types of regulation, there is not about what is allowed and what is not. It's more about how do you do that, the procedures. It's like, for example, we are not allowing shadow banning, for an example, which is a good thing. This is let the user know that they did something wrong. It removes ambiguity from the process. I think it increases freedom of speech eventually. How do you deal with content? How fast do you deal? How do you appeal? How do you flag? You need to have trusted flaggers. You don't need to have trusted flaggers. Basically, I think that eventually the commonality would come from the process that will eventually trickle down to what is acceptable and what's not. Because actually saying this is okay, this is not beyond system would be extremely difficult. And I actually see this thing is happening, and I'm well encouraged about that. And I definitely agree. DSA is going to be a major thing. GDPR changed everything for the internet, and DSA will also change everything. So this thing cannot be stopped anymore.
I mean, at the end of the day, so the U.S. just left the U.S., our USTR just left an international agreement. And for a long time, the United States has been that beacon on the hill of freedom and independence and similar for the world stage. I worry that just by saying, well, all of my friends are doing something silly, therefore I need to do something silly too, is the right response. As a parent, I would tell my kids, I did not raise you well, and we need to have a serious conversation. Likewise, I feel like I have to say the same thing to our own existing government of, just because the rest of the world is making decisions that curtail freedom and individual liberty and free speech does not mean we need to catch up to them. I would argue we are miles ahead of them, and we should encourage the rest of the world to allow people to be free, because I agree, a lot of these businesses are really big, but once upon a time, MySpace was very big, and it's not anymore. Once upon a time, Yahoo, a wonderful NetChoice member, was super huge, not so big anymore. And like all things, there is a cycle, and similarly, when it comes to governments loathe to give up power once they have it. Businesses, once you decide you don't want to use their product anymore, they're going to suffer in their shareholders' values. You can ask Budweiser about that.
So I want to stop it there for a moment and ask what questions our audience has. Yeah. We have a mic in the audience.
I have two observations. I'm worried about it.
Wait for the mic.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Maureen Flatley. Carl was kind enough. It's on. Carl was kind enough to mention my work a minute ago. I'm not a tech expert, but I've spent almost 40 years doing government reform and oversight of child welfare and child protection. And I have two observations to make. One is that while it may seem appealing to let the government make some of these decisions, I'm here to tell you that the government makes a lousy parent. And when you look at, I'll just use the Meta lawsuit as an example. When I went down the complaint of the main lawsuit and looked at all the states that were plaintiffs, alleging all these horrible things on the part of Meta's business practices, I almost had a stroke, because every one of those states has an appalling record when it comes to child welfare, their foster care systems, child fatalities, infant mortality, child literacy rates. So this whole discussion of the states being on the moral high ground and sort of pushing the tech industry around, to me, as an expert in child welfare, is ridiculous. The second thing, and Carl referenced this, is you can have the best platform in the world, but to have all of these companies, many of which I think are doing really fine work and trying to meet the moment, to be able to keep their platforms safe without, to Carl's point, engaging law enforcement is ludicrous. You have 39 million cyber tips last year, Caroline? The number of arrests and convictions, I'm the daughter of an FBI agent, so I'm always looking for outcomes in law enforcement. The number of arrests and convictions in the federal system was minuscule, 1,200 maybe, I don't know, I can't remember off the top of my head. But as I said to Carl, it's sort of like the CVS in Columbia Heights getting shoplifted and having 50 shoplifters come in and steal everything in the store. Did anybody blame CVS for that? No, they called the police. And so as I look at this issue more deeply, there is absolutely no way that children will benefit as long as there's this emphasis on demonizing the tech industry, making the tech industry liable. By the way, the tech industry is a federally mandated reporter of any kind of misconduct with kids. Without the tech industry, there would be no cyber tips. In child welfare, mandated reporters are legally exempted from liability so that they will make the reports. So as I see this, there needs to be a much more deliberate and objective examination of what's going on in the real world, especially when the states and the government starts to come at you guys with all kinds of regulatory frameworks. I personally feel that the government needs to get out of this discussion and let the tech industry start to take it on with the help of law enforcement. You guys shouldn't be grading your own homework. You're not the police. And frankly, I believe that one of the reasons that the conviction rates are so low is that there's a problem with the evidence. And we need to understand kind of how that works and what that is. So anyway, just some food for thought.
I mean, one of the things that's also being left out of the conversation, and I completely agree with that, content moderation at scale, and this was alluded to in the study that was reported today, parents. Like, we're part of the problem/solution in and of ourselves. If we role model really well for our kids how to be decent human beings, look at what they do online, look at how they interact, then that will also help, rising tide raises all boats. That's another avenue that's being missed. Now, there are steps being taken right now. Florida and Virginia took steps to include digital and social media education in schools. So that's a way that we can address content moderation at scale by just making people better, more decent to each other online, and realize you wouldn't say that to somebody in person. I mean, when you're in a car, you always honk a horn. When you're in line at the grocery store and the person in front of you can't operate the self-checkout, you're not walking up to them telling them you're an idiot. So that's the difference, is we need to begin integrating and meeting teenagers, students, and ourselves where we are, schools, clubs, stuff like that. And then that can also be another off-ramp as well.
And Carl, one last observation, and then I promise I'll stop talking. In child welfare, in the context of real-world child welfare, if you expose your child to something that's addictive or dangerous or violent, the caregiver is held responsible. So as I watch the congressional hearings that have been playing out lately, which are beyond mystifying, there is a completely different standard in the digital world. So suddenly, the guy the other day in the judiciary hearing was talking about how his 13-year-old was constantly barraged with sexual advances, and I'm like, excuse me.
That might be the timer telling us that we're out of time. I'm so sorry.
Why does she still have access to that device? And so the parenting issue, which I know is sensitive, is something we really need to look at.
Thank you so much for that comment. This has been such a robust discussion. I'm so sorry, but I'm getting the wrap it up
We
slide.
still have questions for panelists after this. That is totally fine. We're going to have to move back into the main.
This has been an amazing conversation. Thanks so much to our panelists. And thanks to all of you for coming. There were more questions in the audience that we didn't get to, so please don't be shy. Come on up and ask your questions.